CNN7 SABC deal following today's evidence.
I am not aware of anybody who has used any footage without declaring. I'm going to mention carte blanche now. Carte blanche even went as far to declare on a Sunday before they went out on air the Sunday evening. The people I have worked with, production houses, broadcasters, tend to be very, very honest. I've never had any problems in footage declarations, never.
Well, what mechanism was in place to make sure that if they were dishonest, you would have found out?
Was mechanism in place?
What mechanism was in place to make sure that if they were dishonest, you would know, you would find out?
Nothing really, except for me, we would follow up via email on a regular basis.
Yeah, but that if a person says, I've used the footage for 1 hour when they've used it for 5 hours, you wouldn't know whether they've been honest with you or not. Isn't it?
Right, Chairperson. There's just no way. We could have sent somebody out to the offices to go and check each and every bit of footage. You know,
if you had sent somebody, would it have been easy to find out how much the footage had, for how much time the footage had been used, or would that not have been possible to determine?
We relied on the honesty of the client.
That was former SABC employee C.R. Scott testifying at the state capture inquiry. And before him, you would have heard Sundaram talking about visas and how they were misapplied or given quickly, and visa regulations were flouted when employees came from India. Well, to tell us a little bit more about that and what the usual process is, I'm now joined by Gary Eisenberg, who's a immigration lawyer, and he joins us from our studio in Cape Town. Gary, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Great pleasure, Peter.
All right, so you've been dealing with work permits, residence permits and things like that for more than 3 decades now, so you're quite familiar with the processes. Just give us a sense of, how long does it normally take, and especially around about 2013, how long would it have taken to get a work permit at that stage, from the day that you put in your application to hopefully getting it stamped in your passport?
In 2013, of course, we were before the latest amendments to the Immigration Act, which came into operation in May 2014. And then thereafter, VFS was the facilitator to receive applications from members of the public who had to present their applications in person. Currently, the time frame in New Delhi for an ordinary temporary residence visa application is approximately 60 days. In 2013, volumes were still high, and I would suggest it was also about 30 to 60 days time frame. VFS has facilitated the intake, the more efficient intake and conveyance of documentation to the High Commission. So those are basically the time frames now and in 2013.
And why would it take that long, apart from just volumes of work? I suppose there's quite a bit of documentation that you have to submit. What sort of documents and what sort of evidence would have been required to satisfy the Department of Home Affairs?
Well, in the kind of time frame you're talking about in 2013, you talk about ANN7 and those employees who came over. Most of those employees obtained intra-company transfer work visas, or permits as they were then called, where they had to prove that they were bona fide employees of a foreign entity and that they were transferring to that entity's South African branch or subsidiary in South Africa. Now, those documents would have to be examined quite carefully, especially if it was a volume of Indian nationals all representing themselves, coming from a single company in India and transferring to a single company like Sahara Computers. The High Commission, the consular section, would have to make sure of the authenticity of those documents. I think that would be the first call, and to check whether the full panoply of documents would comply, like, for example, a contract of employment with a foreign company, bank statements, medical, radiological, police clearance, a compliance letter from the South African subsidiary confirming the terms of the transfer, a letter from the foreign company confirming the terms of the transfer, and so on. So it was a kind of a simpler application to make rather than a general work visa or a quota work visa or an exceptional skills work visa at that stage. But I think the major two foci of the consulate would have been compliance with a checklist of documents, and number two, the authenticity of those documents.
All right, let's talk about the nature of the employees. I mean, some of these were labourers. Is that somebody that would qualify for an intra-company transfer?
Well, even today, as it was the case in 2013, it didn't have to be a key employee at all, as long as the person was a bona fide employee of the foreign entity. It didn't matter if it was an office administrator or somebody even lower than that, or the CEO. It made no difference the status or the title of the position.
All right, so we hear that some of them might have used visitors' visas because they were coming for a very short period of time, and the evidence is that if they worked well, then they got permits. If they didn't work well, then they were sent back. It's illegal, isn't it, to work whilst you're on a visitor's visa?
Well, in terms of the Immigration Act, if a foreigner resides in South Africa in contravention of the terms of the visa, that visa expires and the foreigner becomes an illegal person, an illegal foreigner in South Africa as a matter of law automatically. But with regard to the Gupta leaks emails, it makes pretty clear of what was going on there. There was very little interest in legality as far as government was concerned when it came to Gupta-related employees.
All right, again, going back to this whole time, you said, it could take 30 days plus. How could it possibly ever take 1 or 2 days? What would need to happen for something to be expedited at such a speed?
Well, I think a complex of officials who are all working in tandem with each other and taking instructions either from each other or from a point man, allegedly Mr. Chawla, who was in constant contact with the officials at the South African High Commission in New Delhi. Things could happen in a few hours. Requirements that were otherwise obligatory could just simply be waived on such an instruction. And that seems to have gone on just looking at those Gupta leak emails.
All right, and perhaps finally, could this kind of thing happen even today, or have the systems changed, improved to such a degree that no one person can override the system?
I can think of, just by sitting in front of you here, a number of ways you can override the system. As I said before, now applicants have to make applications in person at VFS's office in New Delhi. The supply chain would be for VFS to send a pack of documents to the High Commission, and it's not impossible to get hold of an official at the High Commission and speak to them, depending on the status of the person and the receptivity of the official at the consular section, and things can go just as quickly. I don't think they've improved measures, and I also believe one or two of the officials that were there at the time we are talking about are still there. And so is the gentleman who I'm not going to name, who was the facilitator at the Department of Home Affairs in Pretoria. He remains there as the Director of Appeals. So there's very little investigation going on. The same individuals are still in their positions, largely.
All right, Gary, I've got to ask this. In all the years that you've been working there, do you think that there's still corruption in the system at Home Affairs? to get paperwork expedited, that people are getting paid and helping facilitate the movement of stamps in the passport and that kind of thing. Is that still happening, do you think?
In my practice, Peter, we see this all too often, to the extent that we also see that certain immigration service providers are in the business of fraud, and Home Affairs does extremely little or nothing to curb that. So I have my suspicions, but we see this fraud going on very, very often, even today.
All right, Gary, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your insights today. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.